I wanted to talk tonight for a couple of minutes about some disaster playoff scenarios. I'm not talking about, what's the committee going to do with Cincinnati? Oh, what happens if Georgia loses the SEC title game? That stuff is fairly easy to figure out in comparison to some of the things that could happen. So let's walk through some of these together because I want you to think along with me because I think our minds may go down different paths depending on how you're guessing a playoff committee is going to handle some of this. The first one, which I think is by far the most intriguing, is the potential for what we're calling the Big Ten bumper car scenario to play itself out. And the reason that that could be in play is because right now you've got a lot of teams that are in the mix. Ohio State's up there, Michigan's up there, Michigan State's up there, but they've all still got to largely play each other. For example, the games I'm about to list, even though we've only got 3 weeks left in the regular season, all still have to happen. You've got, of course, Penn State playing Michigan this Saturday. You've, of course, got Penn State at Michigan State later on this month. You've got Ohio State at Michigan to end the regular season. You've got Purdue playing Ohio State this Saturday. You've got Michigan State going to Ohio State. All those games still have to happen. Now, obviously, if Ohio State decides to win them all, they're in. If Michigan decides to win them all, they're in. If Michigan State, for that matter, decides to win them all, then in all likelihood, they would be in, although they wouldn't totally control that. They'd still need, I guess they would totally control that, yeah, because they got the head-to-head there over Michigan. My point is, there's one factor that you got to keep in mind here. Whereas Michigan already has a loss, it is a conference loss. And Michigan State already has a loss, yes, it is a conference loss. The Buckeyes, they got a loss too, but it's not in conference. So they are still unblemished when it comes to conference play. Their only loss is to Oregon early in the year out of conference. And so Ohio State, theoretically, this is where the bumper cars start to really get put in motion. Ohio State, in theory, could lose, let's say, to Purdue Saturday, or let's do a head-to-head. They could lose to Michigan State in a couple of weeks. And yet still, if Michigan State were to lose one more game, Ohio State, as a two-loss team, is in your Big Ten championship game. So you could have a two-loss Buckeye team. This is not out of the realm of possibility by any stretch, guys. You could have a two-loss Big Ten champion there in Ohio State, and then you have to ask yourself, no longer is the Big Ten champ guaranteed to be in. That's when you start to have to ask yourself some pretty uncomfortable questions. Like, for example, if there's one spot left and it comes down to undefeated Cincinnati against two-loss Ohio State, you also could work yourself into a situation where you've got the Big 12 there. We're going to go over the Big 12 bumper car scenario in just a second. We've also got to ask ourselves, how many spots is the SEC taking up at that point? And so the Big 10 right now, and we have assumed for the whole season, is minimally going to have one spot. It's not an automatic. It's a near certainty, but it's not an automatic because of the utter chaos that could unfold in this last month of the season. And keep in mind, as is the case nationally, maybe outside of Georgia, we are not talking about elite teams here. Even though I know what these point spreads look like, these are not elite teams. Therefore, you insert a little more variance and a little more potential volatility into these equations. The next one I want to touch on is one I put out on Twitter earlier today. Adam McClintock and Dave Bartu both do really good work. I would encourage you to follow each one of those guys on Twitter. We're not affiliated with them, but, hey, we're friends, so that counts for something, right? They do a very good job of crunching the numbers, using the available data that the College Football Playoff Committee goes by, and they can let you know ahead of time. What would happen if this went down? What would happen if that went down? They're also very good at pegging in pretty exact order how the committee is going to release these rankings. So I say that because I teed them up today, and I said, let's just pose a scenario. Everyone assumes Georgia's going to either win the SEC or at the very least be in, and I do too. One of those at least is going to happen. But I wanted to know, because if Georgia doesn't win the SEC, everyone assumes it's Bama that's going to take it from them. But what if it was Texas A&M? So let's just say Bama's going to lose the Iron Bowl, and A&M doesn't lose another game. That would send A&M to Atlanta, where they would play Georgia in the SEC title game. It would be an upset, I'll grant you that, but if A&M were to just win out and they win the SEC title game, here's what I want to know. Georgia's still in. I mean, unless they drop another game before then, Georgia would be in. They have a good enough resume to where they don't even have to win the SEC to be in. What I would like to know is if we had an undefeated Cincinnati out there, conference champ, AAC champ, 13-0, and we had Texas A&M, 11-2, Included in those 11 wins is the SEC championship. Not only have we never had a two-loss team in the playoff before, I think that two-loss team's ticket would be granted, and if there was only one spot left, I think the committee would put Texas A&M with a two-loss resume in over an undefeated Cincinnati. Now that's where I want you inserted into the equation, because I want to know what you think. Because I floated that past some people today. I did some radio hits all across the country today, and we were kind of chopping that up back and forth. And what I found funny was no one was on the fence. There were some people who immediately said, oh, Cincy's in. Two losses. Come on now, Cincinnati's in. And then there were people on the other side, for that matter, Dave Bartu, who got back immediately, I think it's at CFB Matrix on Twitter, got back immediately. He said, well, number one, this is not plausible. I understand that. But we were having fun with it. And it is possible. Maybe not plausible, but possible. And the second thing he said was, but if it happened, this is A&M. I don't have to give you my opinion on it. I'm telling you the fact of the matter, based on the way we know this committee operates, A&M would be in. Now, can you stomach that? I can. That's where I would go. That's where I would lean. If you take all the critical metrics, you don't have head-to-head, obviously. I'm just leaving that out there because I want to look at the comment section. Probably not going to check it tonight. I want to go there tomorrow morning, give it a good 12 or so hours to sizzle. Undefeated Cincinnati, two-loss SEC champion Texas A&M. If there's only one spot left in the playoff field and you got to choose one, you can't take both, whomst would you put in? How about the Big 12 bumper car scenario? This is one that looks maybe even more likely than the Big 10, even if you don't think it's as juicy, because it doesn't include as many top 10 teams. Remember the games that are still left to play. This is why I introed the show like this tonight. Even though it feels like we're almost through, we're not. These games that I'm about to list still have to happen. Oklahoma at Baylor. That's where we're going to be this Saturday in Waco, one of those beautiful 11 a.m. local time kickoffs. Oh, as I said the other night, find someone. My wish for you guys is that you find someone who loves you as much as I love noon kickoffs on the East Coast. Love them. Can't live without them. Oklahoma plays Baylor Saturday. Oklahoma also has to play Oklahoma State at the end of the year. Baylor goes to Kansas State before the end of the year. Oklahoma State, they got TCU this Saturday, and of course they have Oklahoma. So there's a lot of bumper car, round-robin craziness that could happen here, but that's not the extent of it. Because remember, whereas in the Big Ten, they got your division set up to where someone may go play Wisconsin or may go play Iowa and be heavily favored in the Big Ten championship game. That's not the way it works in the Big 12, folks. They take the top two. And so outside of the scheduled games I just read you, we are also highly, highly, highly likely to see a repeat matchup of Oklahoma versus Baylor or Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma. These things are all on the table. And so here's what I would love to know. You can obviously paint for yourself several disaster scenarios for the Big 12 where they get left out entirely. Here's what I want to know. Oklahoma's at 8 right now, 7 or 8, wherever it is, and it's because of their strength of schedule and lack of game control. And I get all that. I'm not here to litigate that. But what I do want to know is what if Oklahoma goes undefeated? They win versus Baylor. They win versus Oklahoma State, and they got Iowa State coming up too, by the way. I forgot to put that one in there. Yeah, it's a nice little tidbit to know. Yeah, Iowa State still goes to Oklahoma too. So they got a really good strength of schedule boost coming. I want to know if it is to the point where Oklahoma can afford to lose a game. Not regular season, though. I want to know if they would be punished more for losing a game than going to win the Big 12, or making it undefeated to the Big 12 title game, then losing in the Big 12 title game. And again, this is not in a vacuum. You're not just meeting minimum baselines and, okay, you made an 80, so you get a B. That's not the way this works. You are compared to the rest of the field. So depending on how many spots we have, it may still be a moot point. But if let's say Bama does win out and they go to Atlanta and they beat Georgia, well, that's 2 spots taken up already if Georgia doesn't lose again. They're in. If Oregon wins out, they'd be in. Ohio State, if they're winning out, they're probably in. But you see what I'm doing. I'm crowding up that field already before we've even gotten to a one-loss non-Big 12 champion, Oklahoma, whose only loss is in the title game. So don't just assume if they get there undefeated that, yeah, it's a shoe-in. They're in. They may be. It's not a shoe-in, though, especially if they don't have that conference championship in their back pocket. And the last one I wanted to touch on, this will trigger every single one of you. It's why I saved it for the end. I call it the Irish outrage scenario. I think you're pretty clear with where I'm going here. Jesse, you know what? Can you throw up the rankings again? Because I forget where Notre Dame is. I know they're in the top 10 somewhere. You have not mentioned Notre Dame, nor have I, to be fair, in like a month. So Notre Dame right now is sitting down there at number 9. They are, an 8-1 team. You know who their only loss is to. It is number 5 Cincinnati at home. And so if you want to believe in quality losses, they've got one of those quality losses. They've got, I can't remember where the strength of schedule is. It's not in the hundreds, I can tell you that. And they've got very winnable games coming up. So here's what I want to know. I want to know what happens if Notre Dame ends up being in this thing. Clearly, what would have to happen is the bomb goes off, and there's just chaos and alarms and screams all over the place, and then you wait a few hours and the dust settles, and all of a sudden there's movement over here. And then there's some planks that are pushed to the left, and there's a boulder or two pushed to the right, and up pops Notre Dame. And they say, we made it, mark us safe, we survived, we're in the playoff again. Every one of you would lose your mind, because you would say, no one invited you. You can't sit with us. You would go full Mean Girls on them. You can't sit with us. You cannot sit here. And yet they would say, who else you got? This would admittedly be due to a lack of options out there. But Notre Dame's not out of this. Here's how I think this would go. You would have to have Georgia win out, and I think you would need Bama to lose their second game there. Therefore, you've got one SEC team in there. So you got one SEC team. I think you would also probably need a Big Ten and or Big 12 bumper car scenario to clear a path somehow for you. And I also think it wouldn't hurt at all for Cincinnati to get knocked out. While that would somewhat hamper the quality of your loss, it would also knock Cincinnati out from in front of you, and they'd have that head-to-head maybe over you if it came time to judge one-loss Notre Dame against undefeated Cincy. If those things happen, and I know, granted, it's a little bit of a long shot for all of them to happen, I don't think it's impossible. And I certainly think we have some craziness coming. Notre Dame, let me spoil the ending of the season for you. I've got it on good authority they're going to win the rest of their games, even though I think they're like a 5-point favorite against Virginia Saturday. I've got it on good authority they're going to win their games. However, that source has been wrong before. So if it goes right, credit me. If it goes wrong, credit the source. But Notre Dame could still be in this. So I just want to know if we get to a spot where we're struggling to pick 4 and Notre Dame's over there and they got their hand up, could we see the Irish in again? I'm sure everyone would handle that with class and dignity. So those are some college football playoff disaster scenarios. That is not an exhaustive list. I'll be very interested to see where you guys go with that. And I really want to know where you're at on the whole undefeated Cincy against maybe a 2-loss SEC champion in Texas A&M. Because you know what they'd say. What that committee would say is, well, number one, it's the SEC champ. But number two, they'd start doing this thing. They'd start saying, well, probably someone stroking their chin as they say that. Well, you know, this kid, this Zach Calzada kid, they learned his pronunciation probably 15 minutes before they went on air. This Calzada kid, he was fresh off the bench, and yeah, they lost a couple of games, but now they're a different team. Like, I need the committee telling me when a team was and wasn't themselves. Hey, for that matter, put Wisconsin in now. They're a different team. But Cincy fans, you know that's how that would go. Cincy backers, you know that's how that would go. So I'm interested to see if and when we get to that point, how they justify it. Do they just say, deal with it, cause Stone Cold said so, or do they try and hem-haw their way around? You can't use the old go-to. At that point, you can't say, this will all work itself out. No, you are the person at this point who has to work it out. So bookmark that, to be continued.